Today I have with me Rajiv Sikri. He has a distinct career of 36 years with Indian Foreign Service. He was responsible for India's relations with Asia Pacific region.
Over the last 75 years, there's so much poison in the minds of the Pakistanis against India. One of the big things which happened in India that did not happen in Pakistan was the land reforms. Today, there are restrictions on how much land holding can be there. But in Pakistan, you talk to them, थोड़ी सी ज़मीन है, करीब 100-200 hectare होगी. What is the image of Pakistan in the world today? Terrorism, narcotics. And therefore, we are saying, the only thing to discuss with them is how to stop terror and please return us POK. America wants to remain number one, and they do not want any country to become a regional hegemon.
So what you are trying to say is foreign powers who don't want India to rise as a superpower, they are incentivizing the radical leaders' personal interests to make sure that the radicals are always against India.
Yeah. Sheikh Hasina herself talked about how the Americans, without naming the Americans, wanted a base and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to navigate our path a bit carefully. The Soviet Union was a very big anchor for us politically as well as economically. And when it broke up, we had to reorient our policies. And I must say that Prime Minister Narasimha Rao did that very skillfully. Our opening to USA developed. It took some while. And I think that it was really the nuclear tests of 1998 which changed the US perceptions of us. Because now the United States could no longer ignore India. And then since then, our relations have been on an ascendant path.
You mentioned that Russia and US are at war.
Yeah.
What kind of war it is? Because they are not firing weapons at each other.
Well, the only reason why the United States takes Russia seriously is because it's a nuclear power. Because the Americans, let's not forget, are number one today. They want to remain number one. In order for India to rise, we must have America on our side, or at least it should not be opposed to us.
In between so many global turmoils, where is India headed for the next 10 to 20 years? Hi, this is Siddharth Ahluwalia. Welcome to the Neon Show. I'm your host. Today I have with me Rajiv Sikri. He has a distinct career of 36 years with Indian Foreign Service. He retired in 2006 as Secretary in Ministry of External Affairs, a role in which he was responsible for India's relations with Asia Pacific region. He has also published the book that you see behind me, Strategic Conundrums, Reshaping India's Foreign Policy. I enjoyed reading his book on a multifaceted approach how India's relationship is improving or deteriorating with its neighbors, with the larger developing nations at large, and how it's reshaping the common man's life, as we go about it. So, Rajiv sir, welcome to the Neon Show.
Thank you for inviting me to your show. It's a great honor for me to have this discussion with you.
Where is Pakistan in the current scheme of things and the background that led up to it?
Pakistan was born under circumstances that all of us know. And like all of other neighbors of India, but more so Pakistan, it has to define itself as being not Indian.
That's their struggle.
That's their struggle. Because there is so much which unites Pakistan and India. The border is artificial. The people are the same, the language, the customs, the culture, the habits. Everything is the same or very, very close. So Pakistan first has to say it is not Indian. Then when it is not Indian, you become anti-Indian.
Yeah. But not Indian, does it mean anti-Indian by any way?
Well, the next step from not Indian is you say you distance yourself from India.
Yeah.
And the next step is you become anti-India because your identity depends on that. And then you come into a situation where anything which goes wrong is India. This applies to all neighbors. But Pakistan is a special case because they have been supported by the West and now by China. They have an army which is running the country, which is not running it in the interests of the people of Pakistan. And they're riding this Kashmir tiger. They feel that Kashmir is the key issue.
For the last 75 years.
Yes. So they can't get off this tiger. And we have seen, on various occasions, whether it was the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty or the Shimla Agreement after the 71 war, or the attempts during the period of Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi to have a cooperative relationship, Vajpayee and his bus yatra to Lahore, which was followed by Kargil, Vajpayee who invited Musharraf and converted him from a CEO to the president, the Agra summit, which was followed by the 2001 attack on Parliament. Then, you have the attempts to find a solution to Siachen. So many things we have tried to work out an arrangement, but it has never happened because there are so many players in Pakistan.
Like, who are the players in Pakistan?
Well, the most important is the army.
Yeah.
So they have been since 1958 been exercising power either directly or behind the scenes.
And what is the motive of the army?
The motive of the army is to feather their nest, to get all the benefits that they in order to get a lion's share of the resources, they must have a threat. After all, if there is no threat from India, why do they need so much weaponry?
Yeah.
Why do they need so many resources of the state? People will ask these questions because they're not investing in the development of the country. So they need this threat from India. And
but there is no threat from India.
No, there is no, but you have to create a threat. Na?
Yeah.
So you have the Kashmir as an issue which is there. Nahi karo. Ab keh rahe hain, Article 370 must be restored. Where is the hope of that? But they've locked themselves into a corner. The second group of people are the politicians. Now, the politicians are invariably in cahoots with the army because it's an elite political class there, not popularly elected in the sense that in India, where leaders have a lot of genuine popularity. Some of them do, but, they're always mindful of what the army thinks. And they are playing their own games, collaborating with the army to bring down their political opponents. And sometimes when you have an unexpected leader like Imran Khan, who became genuinely popular and therefore powerful, the army got rid of him and has excluded him from politics. So that's the second. The third is the judiciary, which keeps playing games, give bail to so-and-so, exonerate so-and-so, and so forth. And the fourth are these foreign actors. First, it was the British, who played a very important role in dividing India into Pakistan and India. Then the Americans, we've talked about their involving Pakistan in their alliances. And now you've got China, which is supposed to be their ironclad brother, the sweeter than melon and honey and higher than the mountains, deeper than the sea, that friendship. And they have given Pakistan the nuclear weapons, they've given them the technology. The Chinese gave it to them, the Americans winked at it. So all these factors are there. And then the other thing is that over the last 75 years, there's so much poison in the minds of the Pakistanis against India. Their whole system is, to think of India as an enemy state, Hindus as kafirs who must be eliminated. That kind of thing is there. I think, however, that there are a lot of sensible Pakistanis who want to have a more normal relationship with India, who actually look at India with a great deal of admiration, who look at Mr. Modi with admiration. They wish we had a leader like him who's working for the country.
Both countries got separated at the same point
of time. Okay. See where India is. Now, one of the big things which happened in India that did not happen in Pakistan was the land reforms. So feudalism went away in India. Today, there are restrictions on how much land holding can be there and so forth. But in Pakistan, You talk to them, thodi si zameen hai, kareeb 100-200 hectare hogi. I mean, which is unimaginable for anyone in India. The army in Pakistan has chunks of prime land in the major cities. They run businesses.
Army is running businesses.
Army is running. There's a Fauji Foundation which is running businesses, producing, in cement, in petroleum, in construction material, in all kinds of consumer goods.
Army chiefs must be millionaires and billionaires.
Of course. They're very, very rich. I was talking to some Pakistani in London a few years ago, and talk came up, how do the army officers in India live and retired? I said, they live in Noida or Gurgaon or some flat, maybe somebody's got a house. He said, Acha, hamare yahan to, these captains and majors and brigadiers, they bade ghar hain unke to. So they can't imagine that anyone who's retired as a lieutenant general in India
is not a millionaire.
Is not a millionaire. So that is the difference there. So and even their politicians, they're feudal. Huge tracts of land. So that feudalism in Pakistan hasn't gone away. And that is one of the reasons for their thing. Now, in India, for whatever our weakness is, our politicians have to deliver on whether it is roads or railways or infrastructure or, foodstuffs. And in Pakistan, they don't do that. There is a lot of inflation there. And their economy has gone down. So this is the problem with Pakistan.
Tourism has gone down.
Yeah, who visits Pakistan as a tourist?
Yeah.
I mean,
nobody.
Very few people would be visiting Pakistan as a tourist. What is the image of Pakistan in the world today? Terrorism, narcotics, lack of law and order there, fundamentalism. That's the image of Pakistan. Nuclear, brandishing the nuclear weapon. So that does not help Pakistan. And we have tried, various leaders in India have tried to work out a good relationship with Pakistan. There have been leaps of faith, as I call it, but never worked. So now I think Mr. Modi's government has decided enough is enough.
We're not
going to waste our time with them. And therefore we are saying, well, the only thing to discuss with them is how to stop terror, and please return us POK.
Yeah. And the thing is, whenever they attack us X, now we reply with X plus Y.
Yeah. That is also there. So earlier they were threatening us, they are nuclear powers and so forth. But now I think we have said that, you don't have to use nuclear weapons in order.
Do you think our threat from Pakistan has decreased over a period of time?
It will always be there. It's not so overt now, but...
2008, they entered our cities.
Yeah, 2008 was Mumbai.
Yeah.
2001 was the parliament attack. There have been subsequent things. Now, you see, the terrorist threat from Pakistan has decreased in the valley, Kashmir Valley, because I think we worked out a good system there. But our defenses have become weaker in the Jammu region.
Okay.
Partly because we have had to move some of our troops from there to the Ladakh front after 2020. And partly also because the topography and geography of that region enables them to come across much more easily. The main road connecting Jammu with Kashmir is only a few kilometers from the border. So it's very easy for them to, reach the road, hijack a vehicle and so forth. Yes, we do need to improve our policing and anti-terrorist infrastructure there. This is not an excuse. I think we have done much, much better. Fortunately, we have been spared the kind of terrorist attacks on our cities that we had 10, 15, 20 years ago. But we can never be complacent.
Yeah.
Because they're always thinking of new ways in which to hurt us. And the ISI is quite an efficient organization. which is geared towards trying to create trouble for India. So yes, I think the threat from Pakistan is reduced, but it's not over. We'll always have to be vigilant. And for the moment, I don't see any bright future in India-Pakistan relations.
But do you see the Pakistan economy continuously compounding downwards right now? Is there would this stabilize somewhere?
They're going down. I mean, they're always dependent on bailouts by the IMF and so forth. I think that something happens in the Gulf region, it will hurt them also a lot, because a lot of their workers are there and they depend on them for their foreign exchange.
But in Gulf also doesn't treat them with respect, right?
No.
In Gulf, Indians are the CIOs running their, the best of offices, and Pakistanis are the cab drivers.
Yeah. I think we have a lot more white-collar workers in the region, and Indians do not create trouble there.
Yeah.
They just do their job, don't get involved in politics or any kind of narebazi, which is why today there are 3.6 million Indians in the UAE, about 2.5 million in Saudi Arabia, and hundreds of thousands in each of the other Gulf countries, where Indians are the largest expatriate population. And if they are not more, it is because all these countries impose informal limits on how many people they will get from a particular country, just to keep a certain amount of balance. But we have 9 million Indians in that region. That's a lot. So we have huge stakes in that region.
Let's come to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has its up and down relationship with India. Sometime when it got partitioned, they never acknowledged really, right, the role of India that it played in, getting it freed from Pakistan. And whenever the armed forces have taken, up in Bangladesh, they have become more Islamist in nature, as you said in your book.
Well, the Bangladeshi identity is a dual identity.
Are they also anti-Indian by any?
Sorry?
Are they also anti-India by any chance?
I'll just explain that. The first identity is the Islamic identity.
Okay.
Let's not forget the Muslim League was set up in what is now Bangladesh. And a big trigger for partition were the riots in Calcutta Direct Action Day in 1946. So, as an Islamic country, as an Islamic people, they feel strongly about that. And also, there is, I think, the Muslims in what is now Bangladesh were generally at the lower end of the social spectrum, because the landowners and others were the Hindus. And a lot of them migrated then after partition. That is one identity, which revealed itself in 1947 when Pakistan was born. The other identity they have is the Bengali identity, which asserted itself in 1971 when they revolted against Pakistan and Bangladesh came into being. And they're very proud of their language, their culture, and so forth. So they oscillate between the Bengali and the Islamic identities. And there's a third identity also, a Pakistani identity.
Wow, I had never imagined that.
No, because, they were Pakistanis. So a person of my age, or slightly older, started off as an Indian, then became a Pakistani, then a Bangladeshi. And there are many people in Bangladesh who, even in 1971, were opposed to the breakup of Bangladesh from Pakistan. And they remained in that society. The Jamaat-e-Islami, which is now running the show, is a lot of pro-Pakistani elements. You see how suddenly after Sheikh Hasina was removed, Pakistan-Bangladesh relations have blossomed. And the army was eventually a Pakistani army. So those people who remained behind in Bangladesh were trained in the Pakistani mold. Their thinking was that of the Pakistani. And that element remains strong in Bangladesh. So all these multiple identities create certain complications. And today we are seeing the resurgence once again of the Islamic identity of Bangladesh. Bangladesh also has a feeling of helplessness because they are surrounded on three sides by India. I mean, apart from
98%.
98% is with. So they are Bangladesh locked. They are India locked. But our northeast region is Bangladesh locked.
Yeah.
So that interrelationship creates a mutual dependency. And in an overall regional balance, the Bangladeshis balance out India quite well. Now, when Sheikh Hasina was in power, we had Sheikh Mujib, who was assassinated, and then you had decades of army rule till the two Begums started sharing power. Anyway, the last 15 years of Sheikh Hasina's rule has been good for India because she took a very fundamental decision that she would be sensitive to India's security concerns. So all the terrorists, separatists, other troublemakers who were fishing in the troubled waters of the Northeast, she clamped down on them. And you've seen how in the last 15 years our Northeast has developed. Yes. We have not been faced. Now, with that as a starting point, India said, fine, you're taking care of our security interests. We will help you in whatever way we can. And we've been very generous with our assistance. As a long-term strategy, we have rightly, I think, tried to interlink the economies of Bangladesh and India, whether it is transport linkages, roads, rails, maritime, or whether it is through infrastructure, oil pipelines, diesel pipelines, power plants and power lines from India to Bangladesh. Connectivity is much, much more. The economies are a little more integrated. Bangladesh's garment exports have grown hugely. But they are dependent on the availability of yarn and fabric from India. We've given duty-free access to Bangladesh, So all that power is available from India. So all that has helped Bangladesh develop in Bangladesh's interest. This is what Sheikh Hasina did. That good relations with India, she felt, was in Bangladesh's interest. And since our security concerns were taken care of, we said, fine, we don't mind spending money in Bangladesh. Now, that state of affairs is now under threat.
It's again caused by the US.
Well, the US seems to have been behind this.
And what was US interest in this?
Well, that you have to ask the Americans, but I personally think that it's linked to what we discussed a few minutes ago, that America wants to remain number one. And they do not want any country to become a regional hegemon. Now, if India has good relations with all its neighbors, particularly big ones like Bangladesh and Pakistan, then in course of time, India will be at peace with its neighbors and can devote much more attention to the outside world.
Yeah.
And that, in the American estimation, I think, poses a long-term threat to them because, an India which is at peace with its neighbors, large country, talented population, obviously you will want to spread your wings there. Already our influence in the Gulf is strong. Our influence in Southeast Asia is growing. We have strong cultural, civilizational, people-to-people links. Geographically, we are in the heart of Asia. I have argued in my book that we are at the intersection of 5 arcs, very important arcs. One is the arc of prosperity, Southeast Asia, East Asia,
Singapore,
Malaysia, Thailand, going on to Korea, Japan, and so forth. The second is the arc of energy, the Gulf, Caspian Sea, Russia, Siberia, Arctic, Far East, this whole arc. The third is the arc of communications, the Indian Ocean. We are in the heart of the Indian Ocean. We have on 2 fronts, both Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean and the Arabian 3 fronts, we have open seas. And we have a presence in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and now in the Lakshadweep and Minicoy, which we are developing into more bases for our power projection and our defense. That's the third arc, the arc of communications. The fourth, which is the problematic one, is the arc of instability. From Myanmar up to the Mediterranean, you've got so much trouble. And the fifth is the arc of uncertainty to the north, where you have Nepal, Tibet, Central Asia, East Turkestan, which is there. So, historically, India has prospered because we are so well located. Geography does matter. And we can take advantage of our geography again. So, while on the one hand, we must leverage our geographical position, our disadvantage is that our current day neighbors have artificial identities. We talked about it briefly. But so how do they reconcile their identity, their cultural, civilizational identity, which is linked to India, with their modern identity as nation states, which causes them to be a little distant from India? So if a neighbor is a little distant from India, it weakens India. India will continue to grow as we have been, but it could grow much faster if our neighbors were with us. And our neighbors also have to understand that their long-term growth and prosperity is linked to India's. I mean, the rest of the world wants to plug into India. They see the opportunities. Why shouldn't our neighbors want to do it?
Yeah. So what you are trying to say is foreign powers who don't want India to rise as a superpower, they are incentivizing the radical leaders' personal interests, for example, in any way, right? To make sure that the radicals are always against India.
Yeah. I mean, whether it is China, United States also, I mean, it is well known that they had a lot of antipathy towards Sheikh Hasina.
Yeah.
This is very well known. Sheikh Hasina herself talked about how the Americans, without naming the Americans, wanted a base and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Even you see today, Muhammad Yunus went to USA. He was received by President Biden. Not a word about lack of democracy. I mean, what is this government?
Yeah.
It is not a democratically elected government. Yeah. But there's no lectures about democracy, human rights. Hindus are being butchered in Bangladesh. There's no word on that because it suits their overall interest. So, this is a realistic view of world that we need to take. Not the world as we would like it, but the world as it is. And therefore, we have to navigate our path a bit carefully. There's no easy path. That's why I've called my book Strategic Conundrums. Nothing which is...
I want to know what changes started happening post the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989. What caused it? And what repercussions it had on India?
Well...
and you can tell also, where were you when this was happening?
Oh, yes, certainly. I was in Delhi during the period 1989 to 91, and I was the Joint Secretary dealing with the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. So I was a first-hand witness to the decline and collapse of the Soviet Empire, the German reunification, the Berlin Wall came down. And then from 91 to 92, I was the Joint Secretary dealing with West Europe. So I had a ringside view of what was happening in Europe at that time. And before that, for 4 years, I was the political counselor in Moscow during the Gorbachev years. The fall of the Berlin Wall led to the reunification of Germany, then to the collapse of the Soviet Empire and the Warsaw Pact. Russia became a very diminished country. It was in chaos, both political and economic. And this was an opportunity for the West to have reached out to Russia, which they wanted to, see how they can integrate with the West, because they felt that it was, the Russians have always looked to Europe as the ideal. They considered themselves European.
They never associated themselves with Asia.
No. But they have a dual character, because while the bulk of their population and their culture is oriented towards Europe, their territory is mostly in Asia. Their natural resources are in Asia. So the Russians' symbol in Tsarist times was the double-headed eagle, which is, looking both east and west. Unfortunately, in the 90s, the United States was consumed by hubris, and they felt that, as Francis Fukuyama said, this is the end of history. So from 84 to 92, I had a virtually, unbroken perspective on the end of the Cold War, the demise of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, and the new politics.
Let's talk about this, right? What are the events that were leading up to this event that you mentioned since 84?
The Soviet Union was unable to maintain its cohesion. The economy was doing badly. They couldn't keep up with the arms race. And when Gorbachev came to power in 85, he decided that, I cannot do this. And he embarked on a process of internal liberalization, the perestroika and glasnost. And externally, he wanted to have a normal, friendly, cooperative relationship with the West. So there were many arms control treaties that were signed at that time between Reagan and Gorbachev, and then later with Bush. And he was an idealist. He thought that, this is time for new thinking in the nuclear age, and I think he was right. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, and I think the world lost a great moment of opportunity there to reset international relations in a new mold, more suitable for our times. Well, the Soviet Union's economy was a centralized economy, and it was very inefficient. It was not innovative. They couldn't keep up with the West, particularly when Ronald Reagan started his Star Wars program, and it became very difficult for the Soviet Union to keep up with the USA. So Gorbachev decided that for the sake of his country, he needed to modernize, to reform. Earlier on, also, there had been efforts under Khrushchev, under Andropov, to liberalize. But he went about it with greater determination. And the trouble is that things got out of control. And it was like a train which was running without brakes downhill, runaway train. And the crash happened. Soviet Union broke up. It was a peaceful breakup. I think the credit has to go to Gorbachev that he did not send the army to either Eastern Europe or to the republics like the Baltic republics who went away. Now, you asked about what was the impact on India. It was huge. because that is, our economy was so dependent or linked with the Soviet Union. We were getting cheap credits from them, rupee trade was there, and this whole edifice came crashing down. And we were also, if you recall, confronted with an economic crisis.
Balance of payment crisis.
Balance of payments crisis. We had to send our gold abroad. And that is when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh as the finance minister initiated the first reforms process, and we started working much more closely with the West.
Yeah, I think what also happened is when India got its independence, Pandit Nehru started looking up to Russia more than the West, right? And he modeled India as a socialist economy, modeled that based on the Soviet Union. And once Soviet Union crashed, India's idol had crashed.
Yes, that is true, that we had the socialist pattern of society. But let's not also forget that Pandit Nehru first reached out to the West. He visited USA in 1949, way before he visited the Soviet Union. But the United States wanted India as a partner, as an ally, like Pakistan became, and that India was not willing to do. And they did not want to help develop our industry and so forth, which the Soviet Union was doing. We got cheap credits and rupee payment from the Soviet Union. So let's also not forget that the Americans did help us with their PL 480 program on giving food to us when we needed it. But the main reason why we drifted closer to the Soviet Union was that the United States was acting what we thought was against our interests on key issues of our territorial integrity and sovereignty, whether it was Kashmir. They were with the Pakistanis, which joined the CENTO and SEATO. They were opposed to the integration of Goa, Sikkim, then Bangladesh, where they sent the 7th Fleet there. So all this created a certain problem in India-US relations. Now, the Soviet Union was a very big anchor for us politically as well as economically. And when it broke up, we had to reorient our policies, foreign policy. And I must say that Prime Minister Narasimha Rao did that very skillfully. Our opening to USA developed. It took some while. And I think that it was really the nuclear tests of 1998, when we became a declared nuclear power, which changed the US perceptions of us. Because now the United States could no longer ignore India, and our economy had also started to pick up.
And they had opposed the nuclear.
Yes, very much, the nuclear tests. In fact, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao had made all the preparations for nuclear tests, but then these were revealed to the Americans. They got to know about it, and we shut down. So then I think Mr. Narasimha Rao briefed Vajpayee, and one of the first things that Vajpayee did when he became Prime Minister in 1998, 96 was only a few days.
Yeah.
So 98 was to have the nuclear test. Now that created trouble for us, but it also gave us some leverage. And the Americans started taking us more seriously. And Clinton came in 2000, I think he came. And then since then, our relations have been on an ascendant path. And you see what the state of our relations with the USA today, very different from what they were 25 years ago.
I'll also go back in history during the podcast and come to the current scenario, which is very important. Today, you mentioned that Russia and US are at war.
Yeah.
What kind of war it is? Because they're not firing weapons at each other.
Well, the United States has been, let's remember one thing. The only reason why the United States takes Russia seriously is because it's a nuclear power. Because Russia today is the only country which has the capacity to inflict unacceptable damage and even destroy the United States.
Not even North Korea?
No.
Russia, not even China?
No. Because the sophistication of the weapons, the quality of the weapons, the quantity of the weapons nuclear weapons which Russia has is huge, much more than the United States. And the United States recognizes it. And over the last 20 years, the Russians have been improving these weaponry. Now, I think that it has been in the American mind, and people like strategists like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who wrote a very famous book, The Grand Chessboard, they have understood that Russia without Ukraine cannot be a great power. So it has been an objective of the United States for the last 25 years to somehow get Ukraine away, because Ukraine has no natural boundaries with Russia. The people are there, and it would become a wound for Russia. So they have been trying in various ways. First, they had the color revolution in 2003. It didn't work. Then they've been interfering, and in 2014, as you know, they had the coup, the Maidan coup, which brought a pro-West regime into power in Kyiv, whereas the earlier regimes were in favor of a more amiable and cooperative relationship with Russia. So over the last 10 years, there has been this move to weaken Russia via Ukraine. They promised Ukraine that they would join NATO. And Putin in 2007 at a speech at the Munich Security Conference said very clearly that this is not on. But the Americans have pursued that aim. Now, it is dangerous, and why I say that they're actually at war, because the United States has said that they want the strategic defeat of Russia. Now, to want the strategic defeat of a nuclear power is asking for trouble. And the Russians have said that, no, we are not going to submit to this. Why did the crisis arise? Because in 2015, there were these Minsk agreements which promised that these breakaway republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, which have a Russian-speaking population, would be given some autonomy and the cultural and linguistic rights to their people. These, as subsequently the former French President Hollande, the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and the former President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, said, was intended only to buy time. They never intended to implement them. So that was one thing. But I think that the key factor which tipped the scales for Russia undertaking its special operations in Ukraine was when in November 2021, the United States and Ukraine signed a security agreement whereby they would have a presence in the Black Sea, and that threatened the presence and cooperation with Ukraine in the Black Sea area, and that threatened the Sevastopol port of Russia. And Russia said, look, this is unacceptable to us. The Americans said, no, we just ignored it. And as Putin said, he launched this special operation. Now you see how this war has been escalating, and the various red lines have been crossed, the tanks and the artillery, the F-16s have been deployed, and the American and NATO personnel are very much involved in operating these. And they've been giving them intelligence, space-based communications, and so forth. And recently, as you know, the Russians told the Americans and NATO that if you give these long-range strike missiles, the Storm Shadow and others, to Ukraine, which will enable them to hit deep inside Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, then this would be a signal that NATO is at war with us and we will respond accordingly. So for the moment, the Americans have backed off. And hopefully it will, remain cool there. But the problem is that Ukraine is losing the war on the ground. Gradually, but it is losing the war on the ground. The Russians, as I see it, are determined not to stop till they have achieved their objective. They don't trust the West at all. And I think they are waiting for the elections in USA to be presidential elections to be over. Maybe if Trump becomes the president again, there could be a deal, because he has said that, he wants to end this war, whereas Biden and Harris want to continue this forever. So we are at a stalemate there as far as trying to find a solution is concerned. I don't see any change happening towards a settlement, notwithstanding all the noises that are made onto any settlement. It's only when the Americans are ready and the Russians are ready that there'll be a settlement. Mr. Modi can go and talk to Putin and Zelensky and so forth and convey messages, but it has no practical impact.
What impact does this war have on India?
Well, the first impact was that we had our students, we had to get them out of Ukraine. Then it has had not only on India, but a global impact for food and fertilizer. The fact that Russia is under sanctions means our trade with Russia is affected. We cannot send or receive money through SWIFT and other normal banking channels. But on the other hand, we have managed to get cheap oil from Russia because they couldn't sell it in the global market. So we have been buying the oil, refining it, and selling it to Europe at a profit. Now, the Russians have got a lot of money which is blocked in India, and we are trying to see how we can use that, how they can use that money by investing it in some projects here. Our diamond trade is in trouble, our Surat diamond cutters, because the Europeans and the Americans have said that they will, the diamonds which are coming from, the roughs which are coming from Russia cannot be processed and sold in the West. So since that is a big market, so there's unemployment among our diamond cutters in Surat. Then, of course, it has created a lot of diplomatic problems for us, because the Americans want us to be with them in condemning Russia and supporting Ukraine. And we have been quite careful not to do that in the way that the Americans want it. We have been following our own line, and that has displeased the Americans. So it's created a lot of economic, political, diplomatic problems for India. And I think not just India, for the whole world. So I hope that things will settle down, but it doesn't look as if there's going to be an easy solution.
So, in your book, you also mentioned, right, United States started triumphal and unilateral behavior post 1989, which they were successfully able to do. And you can expand more on what these two terms mean to common man.
Well, I think, the Americans thought that, well, and they had defeated the Soviet Union ideologically, and the country had broken up. So, as Francis Fukuyama said, this is the end of history, that there's only one path forward. So you saw that how the Americans indulged in the breakup of Yugoslavia, the bombing of Serbia, including the Chinese embassy there.
These are which years?
Serbia was 98, 99. And, they just ignored whatever Russia wanted. And Russia was too weak. The resources of Russia were ravaged. And there was no counterpoint to this United States. So that was this unilateralism. We will intervene wherever we feel like. And you saw that later on, whether it is Afghanistan, Iraq, then subsequently Syria, Libya, now Ukraine, where they said, we'll just do whatever we want because we are the big boys. There's nobody else to hold us back. NATO was expanded. Earlier, the United States and the Germans and the Europeans had given assurances to Soviet leaders, Gorbachev and others, that NATO would not be expanded 1 inch to the east. And said, maybe, okay, we might take in East Germany.
But they never mentioned Ukraine.
Never mentioned. No, not even the Baltic republics, not Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia.
This is a violation of the treaty then.
Understanding, certainly, not a treaty, but an agreement and understanding. And the Russians were unhappy, but they accepted the expansion of NATO to the East European countries. Even the Baltic states, they said fine. But the other states of the former Soviet Union, they drew a line. When it came to Georgia, they said no. And in 2008, they took over certain parts of Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. And Ukraine was a complete no. And by the way, the Americans understood this because the present director of the CIA, William Burns, was the ambassador to Russia in 2007, I think it was. And he sent a memo, a report back to Washington, which has been published by WikiLeaks, where he says that for Russia, Ukraine is a red light. It's a big blinking red light.
Don't poke your nose in.
Yeah. And this is something which is felt across the board in Russia. But that advice has been ignored. It's because,
Which administration do you think? It was the Obama administration that started interfering in Ukraine, or the Biden administration that?
I think all of them were the same. George W. Bush before Obama. Then after that, Trump, he got into trouble because supposedly the Russians were helping him in his election campaign. But Biden is very anti-Russian. So it's been a general policy. Now, the US president of the day may feel a particular way, but then there are so many influences, actors, influential people, the so-called deep state in USA, which decides a lot of things. And I think that there is a consensus in USA, generally speaking, that Russia must be contained. However, this is a bit dangerous.
And why do you, in your book, you state that the US global dominance is under challenge now?
Well, there's China, first of all, which has emerged as the number 2 country and is economically, technologically, is challenging USA.
Ahead of US in
many areas. There's Russia, which is no longer the Russia of the 1990s, but a rejuvenated and more self-confident Russia. There are other players, India.
But India is too small, $3.7 trillion economy.
Okay. However, today we are the 5th largest economy, 3.7 trillion. In 5 years, you may be 8 trillion maybe. If you continue to grow at this pace, what will happen in 20 years? When we have our dream of Viksit Bharat and you're a $20, $30 trillion economy. Don't forget that this is compounding. So then you could well be the 2nd or the 3rd largest economy.
Yeah.
The Americans are not comfortable with that.
That's why they have Pakistan.
Pakistan, Bangladesh now. Because the Americans, let's not forget, are number 1 today. They want to remain number 1. And they will seek to weaken anyone who is threatening that position.
So Americans have always been in favor of, we want to be number 1 and go ahead also, but we want to push other people down.
Absolutely.
Like anybody who's climbing the ladder will pull them down.
Because they have made a mistake with China. They facilitated China's rise, thinking that China would integrate.
They invested in China.
Helped it join the WTO and so forth. Now, what has happened? China has become a threat to them. They don't want India to become another threat to them. And it's a potential threat.
But how do they balance? Because China is already a threat. If they don't help India anyways, because it has momentum, will reach somewhere and will not see US as an ally at some point in time, will become a threat. Then irrespective, help India, an enemy called China.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you balance that?
Well, this is the conundrum. That's why I called it, there are no easy answers. So yes, the China factor brings us together. Also, I think that the Americans recognize that we have a lot of talent and we have a demographic dividend. They want to attract our best minds to America, which is why a lot of our best brains go and work there. You've got 5 million Indian Americans there. But our challenge is to see how we can benefit from America. And we need America for various reasons, because they are a technology leader in many respects. They have control of the currency, dollar, the SWIFT, there's the stock markets. There are so many there's the military aspects which are there. So it's not in India's interest to have America against us. I think, at least I believe, that in order for India to rise, we must have America on our side, or at least it should not be opposed to us. At the same time, we have to be mindful that there are areas where our interests will not converge or overlap. And therefore, we have to see how to manage those differences without losing sight of the bigger picture, the advantages we get. So we have to pick our fights with the Americans, where we feel, okay, we'll have to give in somewhere, we'll have to.
Now, coming back to the question, US global dominance is under challenge. You mentioned China, you mentioned Russia, and third is a rising India in the 20th.
Yeah, there are also, the BRICS countries, Brazil and South Africa, not on the same scale because India has the size and population.
But what are the other threats that, let's say tomorrow, America's biggest fear, I believe, would be the dollar would not be the global currency anymore.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think that the Americans have done a disservice to themselves by weaponizing the dollar, because it undermines the confidence that other countries have in the dollar. And I think just yesterday or 2 days ago, our external affairs minister said in United States that it's not that we are trying to de-dollarize, but if we cannot use the dollar for some trade and other transactions with other countries, then we have to look for alternatives. I mean, even now, a lot of our foreign exchange reserves are in US dollars. But seeing how the United States has, this is my personal view, I don't know if this is the government's view, that how the United States has frozen the assets of the Russian, the sovereign funds of Russia have been frozen. You're not allowed to do trading in dollars. So a question naturally arises that should we put all our eggs in the dollar basket?
Yeah. What are the other baskets available to India then?
Well, I think gold has become more valuable now. China is buying a lot of gold. We are, I think, doing it a little more discreetly. But you would have noticed that a few months ago, we shifted some of our gold reserves from London
back to India. That we had given to them during 1991.
Yeah. So we have to proceed a little cautious because there are no alternatives really to the dollar. The dollar market is the biggest in the world. The euro, the pound sterling, the yen, these are there, but because the size of the economy, the size of the capital markets does not match that of the US dollar. And also, so far, oil is traded in dollars.
Yeah. And I believe, especially in 21st century, what has happened is the country which had surplus oil, they became the most powerful. For example, you quoted Russia. The rise of Russia has been due to oil. The rise of Middle East entirely has been due to oil. Why has Middle East become so powerful?
Yeah.
Right. And though the world is talking about climate change and the oil is limited and...
No, you're right. I think that for the next 10, 15 years at least, oil and gas will be very, very important. All these hydrocarbons will be very important. Therefore, we need to have good relations with the oil-producing countries because India is deficit in oil and gas. And that's why our relations with the Gulf countries, Russia, Venezuela, Angola, Nigeria, all these oil-producing countries are important. There is non-conventional energy, and I think Prime Minister has started rightly on this program of developing solar energy on a large scale and other non-conventional sources of energy. I think it has a role to play because, there are many applications where you do not need high voltage energy on tap. Take remote areas, rural areas, where your demands are not so high. But if you can provide electricity and the pumps can run and so forth, the level of the standard of living of people increases. It's like trying to raise the level of the ocean by a couple of centimeters. That kind of impact is there. And we are very fortunate that we have lots of sun throughout the year, all over the country. We have a lot of space in the desert areas in Gujarat and so forth, where solar parks can be set up. And many big solar parks are coming up. As you know, we have set up the International Solar Alliance to work with other countries in a cooperative manner. But some of the areas where we are lagging behind is, this solar panels, on which we are very dependent on China, because they're producing on a huge scale very cheaply. And electric vehicles, batteries. The whole battery production in the world is concentrated in China. And they have control of a lot of the rare earths and minerals which go into this production, which they are weaponizing whenever they feel it is necessary. Now, the Russians are also saying that we are going to restrict exports of some
to China.
No, to the world or to the West in general. So, this globalization has gone out of the window. So we are looking at resilient supply chains. We don't want to be too dependent on one country. Everyone's realizing the dangers of being so dependent on China. So that's why we have India, USA, Australia, Japan, the Quad, working on these.
Mentioning of China, you mentioned in your book, China currently suffers from pressure cooker syndrome.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, I believe that in China, it's a closed authoritarian society, and everyone works as they are told to work. But there are no outlets for the expression of grievances. Now, what is the pressure cooker syndrome? In every home, certainly an Indian home, there is a pressure cooker.
Yes.
The housewife knows that so long as the pressure cooker steam is being released and there is the occasional whistle, things are okay. When the whistle stops blowing, you start worrying. What's going on? And because the pressure cooker could explode. So in India, we have whistles all the time.
Yeah.
So there's some steam is escaping all the time. It makes for a turbulent atmosphere, but in one way it is safe because steam is being let off. In China, no steam is being let off. And if there is any explosion, and there have been many explosions in China in the past, Chinese history of the 19th and 20th century is one of great upheavals and explosions.
Can you give examples?
Well, you had the Great Leap Forward, the 100 Flowers movement, the whole Chinese Revolution in 1949. You had the Boxer Rebellion. You had the Taiping Rebellion in the 19th century. So what I mean to say is that there have always been some rebellions, because don't forget that China is also a very diverse country. Yes, they may have a common language in terms of script, but otherwise the dialects are many. And there are, people in China who do not like this strict enforcement which is there. Now, the Chinese structure is such that they have kept things under control, and they try to prevent all these myriad dissidents and people who are discontented from uniting. But if that were to happen, there could be an explosion in China, I think.
But they have prevented it for a long period of time. And if
Well-
they can suppress the voice of Jack Ma, who is one of the largest entrepreneurs, like Mukesh Ambani of China, then they say they can do anything.
But don't forget, they also had Tiananmen Square in 1989. And, despite all their efforts, Tibet and East Turkestan, which they call Xinjiang, is not completely under their control. You see how they are working on Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is currently under their control.
Yeah, now it's become under their control. Now, can they remain like this forever? I don't know. I hope not.
They want Taiwan also under their control.
Yeah. So I hope that the Chinese cannot continue on this, because if they do manage to develop their economy, their technology under this authoritarian system and continue to grow as they have been, it will be a huge headache for the whole world, including India. I mean, I don't see that this kind of thing can carry on indefinitely, but who knows? I, for one, would certainly like to see a weakened China, because a stronger China is not acting in our interest.
But a stronger China is in Chinese interest, and till the time they keep their economy going, their people at mass wouldn't be unhappy because everybody's getting part of the better economy.
But if the economic growth is slowing down as it is now, then that creates a problem. It's like, there's a certain expectation. Now, even if you take India, when your generation has experienced consistent growth over the last 10, 15, 20 years, you haven't seen the period of the 20th century when we were a much poorer country. So your expectation is that you would continue to grow. So no matter what Mr. Modi does or does not do, if he falters on economic, you say, this is no good. Similarly, in China, they have experienced very fast economic growth. People expect this to continue. If it cannot continue, then there'll be discontent. In India, if there's discontent, you change a government.
Yeah. In China, you cannot.
You can't do that. And there is dissidence even within the Communist Party. You see so many top leaders who have been eliminated by Xi Jinping. All that is there. It's not an easy situation for China.
And by pressure cooker, you are also able to say that they are continuously subjugating different races like Tibetan race.
Yes, they
and
are.
the other races.
Yeah.
Uzbeks.
Yeah.
So you say that it will not be forever that you can subjugate.
Yeah, I don't think it can carry on forever. It may take another 5, 10, 20 years. I don't know. But history shows that no country can remain on top forever. Every empire has collapsed.
Yes.
The Chinese state is an empire. The United States is an empire.
But do you see large cracks in these empires right now?
Yes, I do.
That irreparable cracks.
There are cracks.
What is the biggest crack, for example?
Well,
in both the nations.
As far as China is concerned, we've discussed that their system of governance does not make for a stable society, and I think that the Chinese growth has been very dependent on access to raw materials and markets overseas. Now, there will be competition for those resources and markets. India is also going to compete. Other countries will also compete. And if you recall that the Second World War and the First World War, it was competition for resources which led to the conflict. So the Chinese cannot imagine or take it for granted that they would have unrestricted access to the resources of the world.
So if we see in the global scheme of things, uh, if a World War III were to happen, China would be alone. Nobody would come in support of China because
Well, now the Americans have brought China and Russia much closer, which I think is a strategic mistake from American point of view, because Chinese, American thinkers like Brzezinski and others, and earlier also have all argued that you don't want Eurasia to be united, it becomes too strong, and it would seem to be in the interests of the United States to keep these two divided.
where would India join if you think that happens? Because India is close to Russia, and India is closer to Russia than to the US.
I think that we would make up our minds depending on the situation as it evolves. Certainly, I don't see ourselves aligning with China.
I would like to discuss some other things in the next episode, like, for example, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, right? But want to conclude today's episode on few things, right? In between so many global turmoils, where is India headed for the next 10 to 20 years?
Where is it headed? I think the first is, where do we want to go? What is our goal? What is our ambition? As I've often argued, you must have a lofty goal.
Yeah.
When you are in school or college, university, a job, you want to be number one. You want to be on top. If you don't aspire to be number one, to be on top, you will never become number one. That is the first thing that you have to do. Number two, you have to be conscious of what are your strengths. And you must feel that you have some strengths. How to maximize your strengths and overcome your weaknesses. Now, we have, under Prime Minister Modi, set a goal for ourselves as a Viksit Bharat in 2047. We want to be a leading power. ठीक है, it's a goal. Unless you have a goal, then you need to work out a strategy for achieving that goal. How do you go about it? And I think one of the things that we need to focus on, we are beginning to do that now, is to build up our economic, scientific, technological, military strength, be as self-reliant as possible, because in times of difficulty, you can't really depend on anyone. I think we need to develop a lot more R&D, both the government and the private sector. We need to spend a lot more attention on education and health. Our education system is quite bad, which is why so many of our students are going abroad to study. Our health also, infrastructure needs a lot of improvement. Seen the scandals which are coming out of Calcutta and West Bengal. Yeah. So these are things. And then we need to be a socially cohesive society. And I am personally very distressed at all this. Our politicians are constantly talking about caste politics.
So we are going backwards.
So these are things which are distressing.
So people don't realize what made Bihar in the current bad form. It was caste politics only.
Exactly. And then you have your own people, your politicians who go abroad and say India is bad, India is not a democracy, please interfere in our affairs. I think it's quite shameful that Indians should be going abroad and asking foreigners to intervene. Or always, not just politicians, you have your intellectuals, your academics, your journalists who go abroad and they diss India, they criticize India. They don't see anything good in India. I mean, how can you be proud of that? You're not going to become a strong country by that. What are you trying to do? Do you see other countries, people, going around saying, no, we are such a bad country? Now, you can argue within the country that this policy is good or bad or whatever. And we do have very fierce debates, particularly at election time. But going abroad and doing this, inviting countries to interfere, I think that's quite shameful. And this is not going to make us a strong country.
So thank you so much, sir. It's been a very enlightening discussion with you, a very broad-based discussion on where we are today and what do we need to do, right? And the global affairs, you have summarized it very aptly, right? The various currents that are flowing, globally, which currents are against India, which currents are pro-India.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's thank you for inviting me to your show. As I've said, it's a very complex situation. To try and do justice to it in the conversation of an hour or so is not easy. And I'm sure I've missed out many things. But, this book I've written that you have so kindly agreed to discuss is actually targeted at ordinary Indians who are not involved in foreign policy. But because matters relating to foreign policy touch our lives in so many ways, and I do sense an interest among our people in understanding the nuances of foreign policy a little better than just listening to TV debates and so forth, that I hope that this will stimulate some interest. Now, I have offered some suggestions. They're not solutions, they're suggestions, in the hope that will stimulate a debate and people will start thinking, and there'd be a more informed debate and discussion among Indians on what should we do. Because foreign policy is linked very much to our domestic policy and priorities. And we need to focus a lot more on that.
Thank you so much, sir. It's such
Thank you.
a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.